afternoon, good evening all, it's Bear here. And I'd like to welcome you to my YouTube channel, aboxwithnolid, a channel I'm creating not just only to bring the awareness around complex trauma and adoption trauma. I really want to get into the understanding so that we can truly heal. Now this is the next video in the adoption series, and it's the third one of getting into a little bit more detail around the realities of a cognitive attachment and how, when you come from a foster care or an adoption base, how the trauma script created by our removal and placement has created a style of attachment that is absent of biological markers that play an integral part in developing how we connect and how we engage and how we interact, not only in our relationships and friendships, but with our wider world. I'm really trying to pull this apart in as least confronting and triggering way as possible, so that you guys will listen, value, and start to honestly look at how you work with connecting, to recognize your own gaps created if you're coming from this adoption or foster care base, your own gaps. And this is not the blame thing, we're not wrong, but it's understanding where we need to start to develop ways to learn to work with this stuff. To take our connections to another level. Now, there's a couple of ways I can get into this. And I'm hesitant on both because of where the triggering nature of this and how confronting it is. The first way I'll try to explain this is when we have those, I've identified those people in our lives, like I talked in the last video, those few that will actively give us the grace to learn, to make mistakes, to say the wrong thing, to be able to ask awkward questions about how this is interpreted and what does this mean, and if a person reacts this way, where we can get the to and fro engagement to develop the nuances we would have learned if we had a biological connection in a family growing up, in that normalcy. When we have that in our lives, then what do we do with it? Well, for me, you first go back to when we learn to connect in a biological framework. We're little tiny kids. We're infants growing into adolescence and growing into adulthood. But all these steps come from an infancy standpoint and develop complexity. When you're looking at attachment, the older you get, the more complex your interactions become. In an infant, it's very simple and it's very powerful and potent and meaningful. In a young toddler, it's a little more engaging. There's a little bit more personality and identity. There's a little bit more exploration, what is safe, and so forth and so forth. Well, take that analogy and put it with the friends that you can have that grace and understanding with. And start off with the most intense basic. To give an example of one of the most, a rather personal one, and I struggle with this one, but it's the only way I'm going to get this across. Throughout my life, I never realized that I have always tried to connect to people as open and honest as an infant, as a young child, because that connection was never appeased. In my own childhood, very early on, I was placed in a room below the rest of the house with a trapdoor on the floor. I taught myself how to interact from books and animals and very few interactions with people for the first 7, 8, 9 years of my life. And then it was always through these mistakes, because of what I was doing was misinterpreted, which led to the trauma of my adolescence. Because I came from that base, I openly trust in the very connection. So if I meet someone for the first time, they're family to me, regardless of who they are. That part of me gets perceived and misunderstood in so many facets. And it's gotten me into a lot of situations that were not pleasant all around. And a lot of very difficult explanations, or a lot of situations that people, I or others, got hurt as a result. Until I understood that that was what I was unconsciously projecting, that I was unconsciously trying to fulfill. I need to grow up that complexity in connection to an adult appropriate level. And I could do that through the friend that I have, that I'm going backwards and forwards and working on ways of adding the filters, the complexities and the gray areas to allow those stronger connections to develop, not be openly present at the very first point. And I see that with quite a few adoptees and quite a few, adoptions or long-term foster care placements people that I know. There's one side that have that. We have this part. And there's another side that connecting is a no-go. It doesn't happen. And yeah, there are a few, but there's not a lot in between. And this is why I'm trying to get this understanding across with this cognitive attachment process. That we need to develop what we would have learned from infancy all the way through in a biological way of connecting. All these nuances and all these little steps of interpreting what was appropriate, what isn't, what is appropriate with what type, and what is not appropriate with other types, and so forth and so forth. All these things that little kids learn growing up, that we learned in a very abridged way, in a cognitive fashion, as a manual in our brain, not in our nervous system and body. That is the fundamental difference between a cognitive attachment base and a biological one. We have our avatar has all these responses that are appropriate in a cognitive format. There are no feelings. There are algorithms associated to feelings. But there's no actual emotional complexities within that cognitive understanding. Hence, it is controlled. Hence, it has restrictions. It is limited. And it requires that every situation we go in regards to connection to be known. Because the unknown, we don't have the script. We don't have the information to respond. And we don't know what to do. To bridge that, which is the point of this video, when we have that person or those couple of people that we can engage with on those levels and ask those questions, we can start to, in our own way, develop the understandings by asking those questions and by knowing that they're not going to perceive anything malicious from us. We're just trying to frickin' learn. We're given the grace to learn. When you're in a relationship with an adoptee or someone from foster care, give them the grace. The majority of the behavior that pushes your buttons is not deliberate. We are not doing it to harm or do anything against you. We just don't know. We never learned. And we have gaps in how we connect as a direct result of what happened and what is asked of us to survive in a survival attachment through adoption and foster care placement. It's like the easiest analogy of expecting a person to stand upright when they've been kept in a box their entire life doubled over. Their body will develop to crouch and fit into that confined space. Their muscles, nervous system, no part of the body knows how to stand up until they learn it, until they're supported and given the rehabilitation and the physio and all the exercises to develop the capacity to stand up. Emotionally, and attachment and how we connect is exactly the same. If we cannot be supported to learn how to stand up and be part of, we never will. And the only way you heal attachment trauma is through those engagements. And those that we choose to be safe around, that allow us that grace, are the ones we need to value so that we can learn. If you get anything from these last few videos, it's that thing of we need to recognize we have gaps. But we also need to be given the privilege and the right to choose who we will work in fixing and healing those gaps with. If somebody demands us to, they're not the right person to do that with. They've already perceived our actions as a level of malice towards them. We need to find people that will give us the grace and have the awareness to be able to titrate and go backwards and forwards so that we can learn. So that we can develop what we should have been supported to develop growing up. And as I said, we are not wrong. Our responses are not wrong. They are learned from the environment that we grew up in and the survival base that we came from. I will do more videos on this as this progresses. As always, I love your guys' comments and feedback. I'll stop this one here because I don't want to. I'm getting to the point where it's going to require a lot longer video, and I'll do more in the next couple. But I really want to get this understanding across, the differences and how to interpret those differences between a biological attachment and a cognitive one. As always, I love your guys' comments and feedback. Please be mindful, please be safe, and I'll see you all next time.